Hollywood icon Marilyn Monroe died exactly 50 years ago, but time hasn't quieted the mystery surrounding her passing. Her life and untimely death has only caused the movie star to shine once again.
In today's episode, we dive even deeper into the story of the death of Marilyn Monroe, a mystery we've been relentlessly exploring for years. August 1962, Los Angeles. Deep in the shadows of her Brentwood home, America's most beloved and broken star was discovered dead, naked, face down, still clutching a phone in her cold hand. The world was told a heartbreaking story. She died from a massive barbiturate overdose. The glamorous blonde who had everything, finally destroyed by the emptiness inside. For more than 60 years, that was the official truth, until one man could no longer carry the secret. The ambulance driver who answered the call that night, James Hall, has finally broken his decades-long silence with a revelation that changes everything. Marilyn was not dead when he arrived. She was still alive, still breathing. He and his partner began desperately trying to save her life when someone burst in and injected her right in front of him, killing Hollywood's greatest icon in cold blood right before his eyes. Who really ended Marilyn Monroe's life? And why was her death so brutally staged? If you're obsessed with uncovering the darkest, most painful secrets Hollywood has tried to bury, turn on notifications and never miss a single explosive truth we reveal. Chapter 1: The Unstable Childhood of Norma Jean. To truly understand the heartbreaking end of Marilyn Monroe, you have to go all the way back to the frightened little girl who started life as Norma Jean Mortensen. And no one captured the lingering pain of those early years better than the man who would one day stand in her bedroom on the final night of her life, James Hall, the ambulance driver for Schaefer Ambulance Service in Los Angeles. Decades later, when Hall finally broke his long silence about what he witnessed on that August night in 1962, he didn't begin with the flashing red lights or the broken window. Instead, he spoke softly about the dark shadow he believed had already attached itself to Norma Jean during her chaotic childhood. A shadow of abandonment and fear that would follow her through fame, fortune, and into the very moment he tried to save her. Hall, who had responded to countless emergency calls across the city, said her early life planted seeds of deep insecurity that made her especially vulnerable when powerful people later entered her world. Norma Jean was born on June 1st, 1926, in a charity ward in Los Angeles. From the very first breath she took, instability wrapped around her like a cold blanket. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia, the kind of illness that could turn a loving mother into a terrified stranger in the blink of an eye. Gladys would disappear for weeks, sometimes months, vanishing into psychiatric hospitals, while little Norma Jean was handed off to whoever would take her. There was no steady father in the picture, just a name on a birth certificate and a long line of men who came and went like ghosts. By the time she was a toddler, Norma Jean had already learned what most children never have to face. Nothing in life is permanent. She was shuffled from one foster home to another, more than a dozen different houses before she turned 16. Each new placement felt like stepping into another stranger's life. She would arrive with a small cardboard suitcase containing a few worn dresses, a doll with a cracked face, and whatever fragile hope she still carried. In one home, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and cigarette smoke. In another, it was bleach and cheap perfume. The rules changed constantly. One family expected her to stay silent at the dinner table. Another made her scrub floors before school. She slept in attics, on couches, sometimes even on the floor when a new baby arrived and took her bed. The orphanage was even worse. When there was no foster family available, Norma Jean was sent to the Los Angeles Orphans' Home. She remembered the long, echoing hallways, the rows of identical metal beds, and the way the other children stared at newcomers with hollow eyes. Lights out at exactly 7 o'clock. Breakfast at 6. No one called her by name for days at a time, she was simply the new girl. Every Sunday, she would stand by the window hoping her mother would appear, only to watch other children leave with relatives while she stayed behind. The fear of being forgotten settled deep in her bones. Love, safety, even a place to sleep. Everything felt temporary, like sand slipping through her small fingers. Yet through all the moves and the loneliness, Norma Jean clung to tiny sparks of hope. She had a quiet dream that one day she would find a real home where she wouldn't have to pack up again. She practiced smiling in cracked mirrors, imagining a future where someone would finally stay. But the constant uprooting carved something permanent into her heart, the belief that she was unworthy of being kept. Then, in 1942, when she was only 16, the familiar nightmare returned. Her current foster family announced they were moving out of state and could no longer care for her. The state threatened to send her straight back to the orphanage, a place she had come to dread with every fiber of her being. Desperate to escape that fate and seize some control over her own future, Norma Jean made a decision born purely from survival. She married James Doherty, her 21-year-old neighbor from across the street. It wasn't a fairy tale romance filled with butterflies and promises. It was a practical lifeline, a way to stay out of the system and finally have a place she could call her own, even if it meant marrying a boy she barely knew. Standing in a simple ceremony with a borrowed dress and borrowed shoes, 16-year-old Norma Jean must have felt a strange mix of relief and fear. For the first time, she had a ring on her finger and a roof that wouldn't be taken away tomorrow. But deep down, she still carried the little girl who had been left behind too many times. Years later, James Hall, the same ambulance driver who would race through the dark streets of Brentwood on that fateful August night, reflected on this fragile beginning. In his explosive accounts, Hall said the instability of Norma Jean's childhood had already marked her with a profound vulnerability. He described how that early dark shadow of abandonment never truly left her. It followed her into Hollywood, into her marriages, and ultimately into the bedroom where he would find her still fighting for breath. That broken little girl named Norma Jean never really disappeared. She simply grew up and put on the brightest smile the world had ever seen, while the fear of being left behind whispered in her ear every single night. And on the night James Hall arrived at her door, that same fear would reach its heartbreaking conclusion. Chapter 2. Stepping into Hollywood in the height of fame. The war was raging across the Pacific when Norma Jean's fragile new marriage was put to the test. In 1942, just months after their simple wedding, James Doherty shipped out with the Merchant Marine, leaving his 16-year-old bride alone in a tiny apartment in Los Angeles. For the first time in her life, she had a roof that was truly hers, yet the old fear of abandonment still whispered in the quiet nights. To survive, Norma Jean took a job at the Radio Plane Munitions Factory in Van Nuys, assembling small remote-controlled aircraft used for target practice by the military. The work was monotonous, hour after hour of tightening bolts, painting fuselages, and breathing in the sharp smell of solvents. But the steady paycheck and the camaraderie of the other women gave her something she had never known, a sense of belonging. The factory floor was loud, hot, and filled with the constant roar of machinery. Young women in coveralls and bandanas moved like an assembly line themselves, laughing and singing along to the radio to drown out the noise. Norma Jean, still shy and unsure, kept her head down and worked hard. She had no idea that one ordinary afternoon in 1944 would change the entire direction of her life. David Conover, an Army photographer on assignment for Yank magazine, walked through the factory doors that day. His job was simple: shoot morale-boosting pictures of the Rosie the Riveter girls helping the war effort. He moved from station to station, camera in hand, until his lens landed on the slender blonde at the end of the line. There was something about her, the way the harsh overhead lights caught the soft curve of her cheek, the quiet smile that seemed to hide an ocean of stories. Conover asked if she would pose for a few shots. Norma Jean, startled but flattered, nodded. She wiped grease from her hands, smoothed her bandana, and stood in front of a half-finished drone. Click, click. The shutter kept snapping. What happened next felt like a scene straight out of a movie no one had written yet. Those black and white photographs flew off Conover's desk and landed on the desks of modeling agencies across Los Angeles. Within weeks, the awkward factory girl who had spent her childhood being passed from house to house was suddenly fielding offers for pinup work. The camera loved her in a way no foster parent ever had. She began earning more in a single modeling session than she made in a month at the factory. The war ended, Doherty came home, but the marriage was already cracking under the weight of her new dreams. In 1946, at 20 years old, Norma Jean walked into the offices of 20th Century Fox and signed her first studio contract. The executives took one look at her and decided the name Norma Jean didn't fit the image they wanted to sell. They rechristened her Marilyn Monroe, a name that would soon be known around the world. The transformation was swift and ruthless. The studio put her through an intensive makeover. Voice lessons, posture training, even instructions on exactly how wide to smile so the corners of her mouth turned up just the right amount. They bleached her hair platinum blonde and taught her to speak in that breathless little girl voice that became her trademark. Behind the closed doors of the studio bungalow, Marilyn learned to become the ultimate fantasy, the girl every man wanted and every woman wanted to be. But inside, the frightened Norma Jean still watched from the shadows, wondering how long this new life would last before it too was taken away. By 1953, the gamble had paid off in spectacular fashion. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes hit theaters like a glittering explosion. Marilyn, in that famous pink satin dress, sang "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" while descending a staircase in a shower of jewels. Audiences went wild. Just months later, How to Marry a Millionaire paired her with Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall, and the box office records shattered again. Marilyn Monroe was no longer a contract player. She was 20th Century Fox's biggest moneymaker. Her face stared down from towering billboards on Sunset Boulevard, grinned from the covers of Life and Photoplay, and was plastered across movie posters from New York to Tokyo. She had become the global symbol of desire, the ultimate blonde bombshell, seductive, playful, effortless. Yet the public only saw the finished product, the confident, flirtatious Marilyn who could make an entire theater laugh or swoon with a single glance. They never saw the late nights when she sat alone in her dressing room, hands shaking as she reached for another bottle of pills to quiet the anxiety that never left her. They never saw the studio executives tightening the leash, paying her far less than her male co-stars, and punishing her with suspensions whenever she dared ask for better roles or better pay. They never witnessed the quiet moments when Marilyn would stare into the mirror and whisper the name Norma Jean, like a secret she was afraid to forget. James Hall, who would one day race through the darkness to her Brentwood home, later admitted something haunting. Long before that August night in 1962, he had already watched Marilyn's meteoric rise from afar. Every time her image flashed across a movie screen or a magazine rack, Hall felt a strange chill. He sensed, even then, that the perfect image the world worshipped was nothing more than a paper-thin shell. Beneath the diamonds and the dazzling smile lay the same deep, aching pain he had first recognized in the stories of her abandoned childhood. That pain, Hall would later say, was always there, waiting. And on the final night of her life, when he stepped through her door with his medical bag and his partner beside him, he would come face to face with the raw, broken reality hiding behind Hollywood's brightest star. The girl who once assembled toy planes in a noisy factory had become the most desired woman on earth. But fame, as Marilyn was about to learn, could be the most dangerous foster home of all. One that promised everything and, in the end, offered nothing that could truly make the little girl inside feel safe. Chapter 3. The Pressure, the Pills, and the Private Life. Fame had lifted Marilyn Monroe to the very top, but the higher she climbed, the thinner the air became. Behind the dazzling smile the world adored, the studio machine tightened its grip like a vice. Every move was scripted. Executives hovered in the shadows of sound stages, correcting the angle of her hips, the tilt of her head, even the precise width of her smile in front of the camera. Softer Marilyn, sexier, less intelligent, they would say, as if she were a doll they could mold and remake at will. Her paychecks told the same humiliating story. She earned far less than her male co-stars, yet she had zero say in the scripts handed to her. When she dared push back, refusing yet another dumb blonde role or demanding a raise, 20th Century Fox suspended her without pay. The message was brutally clear. The image mattered. The woman behind it did not. The breaking point came in the mid-1950s. Exhausted and furious, Marilyn did something almost unheard of for a woman in Hollywood at the time. She founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. It was an act of quiet rebellion, a desperate grab for control in a world that had dictated every breath she took. For a brief moment, she felt powerful, but the battles left deep scars. The stress never let up. Nights became endless. Insomnia wrapped around her like chains. Hollywood doctors, quick with the prescriptions, handed her barbiturates to knock her out and stimulants to wake her up again. Soon her dressing room cabinet overflowed with amber bottles. She would sit alone at 2 a.m., hair still pinned in curls from the day's shoot, hands trembling as she counted out the pills that kept the panic at bay. One more to sleep, one more to face tomorrow. The cycle grew tighter, more dangerous. Yet Marilyn still hungered for respect as a serious actress. She escaped to New York and threw herself into the actor's studio under the legendary Lee Strasberg. In those small, intense classes, she worked raw and fearless, stripping away the blonde bombshell mask to reveal the wounded Norma Jean underneath. Strasberg praised her dedication, calling her one of his most committed students. For the first time, she tasted real artistic validation, but it only widened the terrifying gap between who she wanted to be and the glittering fantasy the studio sold. The pressure mounted. Friends noticed her mood swinging wildly. Paranoia crept in like fog. She began to suspect everyone, agents, lovers, even the people closest to her, of hidden motives. She whispered about secret recordings, about powerful men who wanted more than just her company. She feared her phone was tapped. She feared her privacy was already gone. James Hall later said these exact years were when Marilyn became the most fragile he had ever seen. The pills, the studio control, the constant fear of betrayal, they had hollowed her out, leaving her paper-thin and dangerously exposed. That same vulnerability, Hall believed, was exactly what made her a threat to the wrong people and set the stage for the night when someone would make sure she could never talk again. Chapter 4. The Final Months and the Dangerous Relationships. By the spring of 1962, the dream that had once seemed unbreakable was cracking wide open. Marilyn Monroe stood on the soundstage of Something's Got to Give, the film that was supposed to mark her triumphant return. Instead, the set felt like a tomb. The director would call action, and the cameras would roll on an empty space where Marilyn should have been. Some mornings she arrived hours late, eyes glassy, makeup already smudged from crying in the car. Other days she simply never showed up. The crew whispered behind clipboards while production costs climbed higher every week. Empty director's chairs, half-lit sets, and the faint smell of stale coffee hung in the air like a warning no one wanted to admit. On June 8, 1962, the axe finally fell. 20th Century Fox did it publicly and without mercy. Headlines screamed across the trade papers, "Marilyn Monroe fired!" The studio blamed her unreliability, painting her as the spoiled, erratic star who had single-handedly shut down a million-dollar picture. Marilyn sat alone in her Brentwood house that afternoon, the phone ringing endlessly with reporters demanding a comment. She stared at the newspaper photo of herself, the same dazzling smile she had perfected for 20 years. and felt something inside her finally give way. For a moment, the old Norma Jean resurfaced, the girl who had been thrown away too many times to count, and the pain was so sharp it felt physical. But behind the public humiliation, a quieter, more desperate drama was unfolding. Dean Martin, her co-star and friend, refused to continue filming without her. "No Marilyn, no picture," he told the executives flatly. The studio, suddenly staring at massive losses, began secret negotiations. Memos flew back and forth in late June and early July. Fox quietly offered to reinstate her at the original salary, drop every lawsuit, and pretend the public firing had never happened. Marilyn, exhausted and hopeful, agreed. By mid-July, the deal was done. She was officially back on the payroll. New publicity photos were scheduled. Friends who visited her in those final weeks later remembered the fragile spark in her eyes. She spoke excitedly about finishing the film, about future projects, about proving everyone wrong. For the first time in months, she sounded like she believed tomorrow might actually be better. Yet the truth was far darker. Her dependence on sleeping pills had spiraled out of control. Pharmacy records would later show a frightening spike in prescriptions throughout 1962. Multiple doctors, each unaware of the others, were writing overlapping scripts for barbiturates. At night, the house grew silent except for the soft click of pill bottles. Marilyn would sit on the edge of her bed in the dim lamplight, hair falling across her face, counting out the little white tablets that promised sleep but delivered only deeper emptiness. The stimulants that once kept her camera ready now left her heart racing and her mind paranoid. She paced the rooms, convinced someone was listening. She double-checked locks. She whispered fears into the telephone late at night, afraid even her own walls had ears. And then there were the Kennedys. The rumors had swirled for months, but in those final weeks, they became a dangerous current pulling her under. Whispers linked her intimately to both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Hollywood insiders spoke in hushed tones about private parties, late-night calls, and a relationship that had moved far beyond flirtation. FBI files from the era quietly documented Marilyn's repeated proximity to the Kennedy inner circle. Phone logs, travel records, sightings at events where the powerful and the famous mixed in ways the public was never meant to know. To the outside world, it looked like glamour and power. To Marilyn, it felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. What almost no one knew, until James Hall revealed it decades later, was that in those final months, Marilyn had begun keeping a secret diary. A small red leather-bound book that she guarded like a lifeline and a curse. Inside its pages, she had written everything. The intimate details of her nights with the Kennedy brothers. The political secrets they had let slip in moments of passion or carelessness. The promises made and broken. Hall would later say the diary was not just personal, it was explosive. Names, dates, conversations that could have shaken the highest levels of government. Marilyn, fragile and furious at being cast aside again, had started to see the diary as both her insurance policy and her revenge. Friends noticed the change. She grew more withdrawn, more suspicious, her mood swinging like a pendulum between fragile hope and crushing despair. One day she would talk brightly about the new photos and the finished film. The next she would sit silently on the couch staring at nothing, the diary hidden somewhere only she knew. The little girl who had once been passed from foster home to foster home was now the most famous woman alive, yet she had never felt more alone. James Hall described those final months as the moment Marilyn became the most dangerously vulnerable person he had ever encountered. The pills, the studio wars, the terrifying weight of what she knew about the Kennedys, it had all combined to leave her paper thin. Hall believed the secret diary was the single reason someone somewhere decided she could no longer be allowed to live. Because if that red leather book ever reached the wrong hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. As July slipped into August, Marilyn stood on the edge of what looked like a second chance. The cameras were waiting. The world was watching. But in the quiet hours inside the Brentwood house, the shadows grew longer. The diary lay hidden. The pills waited on the nightstand. And somewhere in the darkness, forces far more powerful than Hollywood were already deciding that Marilyn Monroe's final scene would not be the comeback she dreamed of, but a permanent, brutal silence. Chapter 5. The Fateful Night. The Driver's Testimony and the Conspiracies. August 4th, 1962. The warm Brentwood evening had already turned heavy with silence by the time the phone rang at Schaefer Ambulance Service. James Hall, a seasoned driver who had answered thousands of calls across Los Angeles, took the dispatch without knowing it would haunt him for the rest of his life. The address was familiar: 12305 5th Helena Drive, Marilyn Monroe's secluded Spanish-style home. The call came in as a possible overdose. Hall and his partner, Murray Leibowitz, loaded the rig and raced through the darkened streets, red lights cutting the night like warning signs no one would ever fully read. They arrived just after midnight. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Hall later described the air as thick, almost electric, the way it gets right before something irreversible happens. They moved quickly through the living room and into the guest cottage where Marilyn was known to spend most of her nights. There she was. Marilyn Monroe was not dead. She lay on the bed, nude, her platinum hair spilling across the pillow. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. Hall dropped to his knees beside her. He and Leibowitz immediately began CPR, mouth-to-mouth, chest compressions. She was coming back, Hall would later swear under oath in private interviews. Her color was returning, her eyelids fluttered. She was fighting. For the first time in years, the woman the whole world thought was already gone was actually trying to live. Then the door burst open. Dr. Ralph Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist, stormed in. His face was tight, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stop," he ordered. "Get away from her." Hall looked up, stunned. Before either paramedic could react, Greenson produced a long syringe filled with a dark, brownish liquid. Without hesitation, he drove the needle straight into Marilyn's heart, between the ribs. Hall watched in horror as her body jerked violently once, a single violent spasm, and then went completely limp. The faint pulse he had felt only seconds earlier vanished. Marilyn Monroe was gone. What happened next, according to Hall's explosive testimony decades later, was the beginning of the cover-up. The body was loaded into the ambulance, but instead of racing to the hospital, the vehicle was ordered to turn around. Someone, Hall never named the voice on the phone, instructed them to bring her back inside the house. They placed her exactly where she had been found, face down on the bed, phone still clutched in her hand, door locked from the inside to sell the suicide story. While police were still hours away, Eunice Murray, Marilyn's housekeeper, was already washing the bed sheets in the laundry room, trying to erase any trace of what had really happened. The official timeline, released later, told a much cleaner story. At 3:30 a.m. on August 5th, Dr. Greenson arrived after a frantic call from Murray. He broke a bedroom window to get inside and found Marilyn lying face down, completely naked, the telephone receiver still in her grip. Dr. Hyman Engelberg, her personal physician, arrived minutes later and formally pronounced her dead at 3:50 a.m. The Los Angeles Police Department was not notified until 4:25 a.m., nearly an hour after the body had supposedly been discovered. The autopsy revealed staggering levels of pentobarbital in her blood and liver, plus chloral hydrate, amounts several times a fatal dose. No external injuries, door locked from the inside. Case closed. Probable suicide. But Eunice Murray's story never stayed straight. In her first police interview, she claimed she noticed a light under the bedroom door around 3:30 a.m. and called Greenson immediately. Years later, she changed details on British television, admitting she had covered up parts of the story. She was seen washing the sheets when the first officers finally arrived, a detail missing from her original statement. James Hall refused to stay silent forever. In detailed accounts given long after 1962, he insisted Marilyn was alive and responding when he reached her. The injection he witnessed, he said, was not medical help. It was murder. And the reason, Hall believed, was locked inside a small red leather diary Marilyn had kept hidden in those final months. The diary contained explosive entries, detailed descriptions of her affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, whispered political secrets, promises made in private bedrooms, and threats that if she was discarded again, she would go public. According to the darkest corners of the story that almost no one dared speak aloud at the time, Robert F. Kennedy himself had been at the Brentwood house earlier that evening. He had come to confront Marilyn about the diary and the secret tape recordings she had allegedly made of their conversations. When she refused to hand them over, the order was given. She had to be silenced before she could destroy everything. Some versions claim mafia boss Sam Giancana, who had his own long-standing grudge against the Kennedys, supplied the muscle or the drugs. Others point to CIA operatives who saw Marilyn's knowledge as a national security risk that could be used to pressure the president. Whatever the truth, the body was removed, then carefully returned and staged to look like the tragic end of a troubled star. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office quietly reopened the case. Their review admitted what many had suspected for years. Witness statements conflicted wildly, key records had mysteriously vanished, and the timeline simply did not add up. Yet they concluded there was not enough credible evidence to charge anyone with murder. The file was closed again, leaving the shadows deeper than ever. James Hall carried that night with him for decades. He had seen Hollywood's brightest star take her last breath not from pills, not from despair, but from a single, deliberate injection delivered in front of him. He had watched the most powerful people in America erase a woman who had simply known too much. And somewhere the red leather diary, if it ever truly existed, remains one of the most dangerous missing pieces in the entire mystery. Because if Hall's account is true, Marilyn Monroe did not choose to die that night. Someone made the choice for her. And so, officially, the story remains unchanged. Marilyn Monroe died by her own hand, a heartbreaking end to a life that seemed to have it all. But James Hall's devastating testimony refuses to let that lie rest. The ambulance driver who stood in that bedroom and watched her final breath leave her body has torn the official narrative wide open. His words, combined with the endless contradictions, the missing records, and the shifting stories from those who were there that night, have kept this wound bleeding for more than 60 years. Marilyn was never just another broken star swallowed by Hollywood's merciless machine. She may have become something far darker, the ultimate victim of powerful men who decided her silence was worth more than her life. Men who needed her secrets buried forever. Even now, decades later, the files are still incomplete. The questions still scream in the dark, and the truth remains just out of reach. James Hall, the only man who claims he witnessed her very last moment, carried that unbearable secret locked inside him for nearly half a century before he finally spoke. What he saw that night never left him, and it should never leave us either. So I have to ask you, who do you believe really killed Marilyn Monroe? Was it the Kennedy brothers protecting their empire of power? Was it the mafia tying up dangerous loose ends? Or was it simply the unbearable weight of her own shattered dreams finally crushing her? Tell me in the comments below, which theory keeps you up at night? If you want to keep uncovering the darkest, most painful secrets Hollywood has tried to bury, then hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves the truth, and subscribe to Hollywood Files right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, because some wounds never close. Some stories never end, and some icons are never truly allowed to rest in peace.